This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samad from Navigant Research.
And I'm Rebecca Leman from Rebecca Drives.
Yeah, I forgot to say where I'm from, but everybody knows where to find me. All right, so thank you guys for covering while I was out. It seems like you guys did a podcast and you were on NPR and stuff and like everywhere. I kind of feel like I slacked. Which
Well, we're used to that from you.
Yeah, that's true. I was on vacation.
But you did assemble the audio for the last podcast, so that's you did contribute.
Yeah, that's right. I was just behind the scenes contributor.
Yeah, and you can make up for it because we're basically not going to say anything for the next 90 minutes. So,
do you really want to listen to me talk for 90 minutes? Nobody wants to hear me talk for that long. All right. Well, we've got some cool stuff to actually talk about. You guys both went to the FCA What's New event, so you can talk about that. There's some cyber hacking that went on with Tesla Model 3 and Model S, some testing there, and then started off with what we're driving. So Rebecca, you last week I think had the Lexus RC350 F Sport all-wheel drive, and you talked about the infotainment, but not about anything else, or very lightly about everything else.
Exactly.
So how is it besides the infotainment, which I'm pretty sure you didn't like?
So this is, it's such a beautiful vehicle. The one that I had was this atomic silver that is just this gorgeous kind of champagne-y color that really attracts attention. I mean, a number of people came over and wanted to know what the vehicle was. And it's a beautiful vehicle. It has these gorgeous lines, and I'm not always a fan of really kind of overly expressive design, but I really liked the look of this vehicle, and the interior was absolutely beautiful. So there were things that I really, really liked about it from a style standpoint, and actually it was an incredibly fun vehicle to drive. It had great power. The particular one that I had has a 3.5 liter V6 engine. It had 311 horsepower, a 6-speed automatic transmission, these fun paddle shifters. They said it has all-wheel drive, and it was really dynamic. I mean, it had great power, fun to kind of zip around in, great in the twisties, kind of everything that you want in a sport coupe. And so that's what kind of made it frustrating then for me to not even be able to do something as remedial as pair my phone. And that was really annoying.
Maybe it's a new driver safety feature where they're just going to annoy the crap out of you. So you just don't use that stuff.
Right?
Actually, no, that's bad because it puts you back into using the phone handheld if you're determined to use it.
Well, so what actually ended up happening, I think one of the things that I was so annoyed about was just that I think I said this last time, was it was late. It was after a long flight. I had to talk to my brother about a family matter, and I needed to drive at the same time because I had to get to that family matter. And it sort of was a perfect storm of really needing my phone to work and not fight with my car. And so it was frustrating from that standpoint. I continue to be perplexed and amazed that they don't have Android Auto. And so, beyond the Toyota Avalon, I think. So that's something that I think that Toyota and Lexus really need to get on, as we talked about before. But overall, there's a lot of really good things about this vehicle. Once I kind of got past the infotainment part of it and started to really enjoy driving it. I did enjoy driving it. It's much more, it was much more athletic and had a better feel and a better dynamic performance than I've had with other Lexus. I think they kind of went through a soft phase where they just didn't, they were almost, they were kind of doing this really puffy, kind of soft, we don't want to feel anything mindset. And I think
that was always the criticism, right? From when they were introduced, was that they're nice and they're cushy, but they really don't want to hustle.
Right. And
behave like a German.
So I think that they've I think they've dialed that back enough so that now you can get the kind of responsiveness that you want from this vehicle. And certainly, as I said, it's the sporty look to it. I think the driving dynamics and the personality started to come out more, and eventually we became friends. There was a couple of annoyances that I didn't understand beyond the infotainment system. The indicators, I think I'm so used to a three tap indicator, like you tap it and it blinks 3 times, you move over, and then it automatically shuts off. These seem to have stayed on, and I was constantly having to fool with the indicators, which is distracting, quite frankly, making sure that I have the indicators off. So I think there were just a few things that I haven't had a negative experience in other vehicles recently that I had in this, which was a little, again, just a little annoying. And as I said, we eventually became friends. We're not BFFs, but I'm but I've reconciled myself. One of the things I would love to ask you guys, I have Amazon Alexa at home, and I like Amazon Alexa, and she's staring at me right now and blinking. So Alexa, quit. I don't.
She's saying, tell her to self-destruct. That's all.
I don't understand what you're supposed to do with it in the car.
Yeah, that was. I test. So for reviewed.com, they make a little Alexa doohickey. I forget what it's called.
Well, is that the one, the Rove, the one made by Anchor?
No, it's oh darn, I forget what it was. It's just this little, darn it. I'm looking for the article now. Because I've reviewed, hang on a second. The Garmin Speak. Okay.
Oh,
so the Garmin Speak is Alexa enabled, and it had some nice functionality to it, but I was also confused about what do you really get out of having Alexa in the car?
Yeah, I'd much rather have Android Auto.
So I think that the one thing that you do get from having Alexa in the car is you get a standardized interface, right? So Alexa works the same in the car as it does at the home. So you say Alexa and it perks up and you ask it to do the thing. I found that its feature set was a little limited in that instance, and maybe it's gotten better because it's been over a year since that I tested that unit. Okay. So maybe it's gotten better. But when you're at home, right, you can use it to do all those home things.
Well, that's the thing, is that I love her in my house. I mean, she controls my lights and music and TV and reminds me of things. And, when I'm in a hotel room and I say her name, even though there isn't a device there, because I'm so used to saying, hey, what's the temperature or what's the weather going to be? So I was a little confused by, and honestly, I didn't explore like I should have done, because I don't even know how to get this thing activated. And I think in part,
I think you actually have to have an Alexis Inform account set up.
Well,
and
that was the other thing. Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess
you link your Alexa account to that.
Okay.
That's another question I have too, is because it's integrated to the car. My assumption would be that it actually can control some functions in the car that the aftermarket unit can't. So once you have it,
don't assume such things.
Yeah, I mean, that's my assumption.
I think the only things that can, at least right now, I think the only things that can control in the car is doing things like if you have an Amazon Music account, you can use it to start playback of music, and request, tell it to play certain songs or albums or artists, things like that. So those sorts of things. You can also, if you've set up Alexa skills on your account, you can use it to command things at your house. So, for example, if you've left, if you've got got something set up for your garage door opener, you can have it, control. You can make sure if you forgot to close the garage door, you can close the garage door with it, or turn on the lights. You can have tell it to turn on your exterior lights. things like that. So you can control all the stuff in your home from the car. So if you're on your way home, you can turn things off, or if you're leaving, you can turn things off as needed. Over time, this is an area that's probably going to expand quite a bit, because Amazon has a whole division, a whole operation set up to work with OEMs. They've got a version of Alexa, Alexa Automotive, that is intended to be a digital assistant, or a version of this digital assistant specifically for use in the car, that will be more integrated into the features in the vehicle, rather than just being like something you can control stuff outside of the vehicle.
Right.
Yeah, I found that those things that it does, like it comes at a pretty hefty investment of your time and energy, and actually you've got to fiddle with it to enable those skills, and just really the setup is the real sort of pain for it.
Yeah, it's a commitment for sure. And I think, one of the things that's disappointing, obviously, in a media car is we don't have the Entune. We don't have an Entune account. This one didn't even have the Sirius XM satellite radio set up. So, I wasn't able to do as much with the infotainment with some of these features that it comes with. But so overall, I mean, again, I did enjoy the different drive modes. There was definitely a difference between the normal, the Sport S, and the Sport S Plus and such. And I obviously didn't get a chance to drive it in snow, but I think that there's things that it has that I don't know if people will necessarily pay for, but you're kind of stuck with it because it comes with it. So this one had an MSRP of $52,400. It had a couple of navigation triple beam LED headlamps for $1,160, which seemed excessive, and so all told it was $57,000.
It doesn't seem like a terrible deal. Like,
hey Rebecca,
yes.
Have you driven the RCF before?
No.
Okay. That's the version with the 5-liter V8 from the LS.
I bet that's fun.
Well, the reason I asked is, I've driven the RCF, and I've driven the RC350, not the F Sport version of it, but just the standard RC350 about 3 years ago, and I actually preferred the RC350 to the RCF. Because that V8, in the RC is a relatively small coupe, and the V8 is pretty big and bulky, and I think with the V6, with the 3.5-liter V6, it actually feels better balanced than it does with the big V8, even though the big V8 has more power and its overall acceleration is better.
Right.
I actually found the 350 to be more fun to drive, because it feels a little more nimble than the RCF, even though its ultimate limits are lower.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, it was really fun to drive. As I said, I started to really enjoy it. It was, there's a lot to be said.
As long as you don't touch the touchpad.
Exactly. Just don't touch the touchpad.
Well, I find it curious. It's like that enjoyable when it's only got 311 horsepower. It's not exactly a light car either. So I'm sure performance is good, but it's a personal luxury coupe. It's a Thunderbird. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just,
No, but it was. I mean, it was, for the purposes of getting from A to B, of a commuter, to spice up your commute, right? You're not going to race with this thing. But if you need, if you want something that is luxurious to drive, heated and cooled seats, heated steering wheel, all the amenities, then I thought it was okay. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily buy one for myself, but as I said, we became friends.
And
that's the best way to describe it.
To your complaints about the lack of Android Auto and things like that, Toyota started rolling out a new generation infotainment system last year with their Entune 3.0 system, which is a completely re-engineered, re-architected system compared to what they had before. and the system that's in all the Lexuses right now is based on the same architecture as their older generation Entune system. And the new one is based on automotive grade Linux, and it's a completely different system, completely different software. And they will be adding eventually Android Auto to both the Toyotas, and as new generations of Lexus vehicles come to market, they're going to have new generation infotainment system that is based on the same architecture as the latest Entune. So hopefully it'll also eliminate the touchpad, but at the very least, the software will be better, should be better, and it'll have it'll have both CarPlay and Android Auto built into it in time, over the next couple of years.
Right. I mean, I think what's amazing to me is, we've spent a lot of time the last couple of weeks talking about Kia and Hyundai and how those interfaces are pretty darn sophisticated, and a brand like Toyota and Lexus have gotten left behind, which is really shocking to me. Walking around CES, for instance, with people that are deeply embedded in Microsoft and Apple and such, they keep talking to me about how far behind some of the automotive brands are. And I think it's something that as an industry, we really need to look at. Some people are doing it really, really well, but we can't keep thinking about infotainment as an afterthought.
Right. And that's why companies like Amazon are, trying to break into this space and, work with the manufacturers to embed their stuff right in the vehicles and, get some more sophistication in there. We're starting to see some of the fruits of this, especially with, I think one of the big advantages to a lot of these systems is they do incorporate cloud connectivity. That's why you're able to get, more natural language style voice processing, in there, as opposed to having to remember a very limited vocabulary of very specific commands to do things with voice recognition. You're going to be able to do, much more natural language input with systems like Alexa and Google Assistant, and maybe even eventually Siri. And there's others as well, like the system from Nuance. Their latest system incorporates cloud connectivity as well. So they should be a lot easier to use and have a lot more capability.
Yeah, I think part of the reason why automakers have lagged behind, at least in the eyes of some of the tech companies, is that the automotive environment is really hostile, and the stuff just has to last. Even just the physical touchscreens have to be of a certain grade that can handle the temperature swings and still provide consistent performance over X amount of years, because the automaker doesn't want to have to call the car back to replace screens every 2 years while it's under warranty or whatever. Like, that's just not a good experience for anybody.
Right, and that's a problem that Tesla has had, with those big 17-inch touchscreens in the Model S and the Model X.
You don't say.
there were no suppliers that made an automotive grade display that size.
That is a laptop grade display, I believe, right? Like or a tablet grade. It's not.
Right. It was for industrial applications, actually, okay. I think. But regardless, it wasn't an automotive grade display. And, so they've had a lot of issues with those, with, the adhesives that hold the thing together, melting in the heat, when it's sitting out there in the sun from the solar load.
In fact, dog mode.
Turning the display yellow.
Right. Dog mode is a ruse. It has nothing to do with having your dog survive in the car. It has everything to do. It's about having the car survive. Right. With keeping that touchscreen below a certain temperature when the Tesla model, whatever, is parked in the sun, so that they don't have to replace as many screens. So it's just, that's one of the things. And the Toyota system really, to me, I agree. It feels like they've been left behind by other automotive companies who are doing it better. So I don't know if they had some of that like insular kind of like, well, we do it the Toyota way. And
they are starting to move beyond that with the Entune 3 system. They're using, it's, based, like I said, on the open source automotive grade Linux platform, and this is a platform that, Toyota's been a big supporter of over the last several years, taking Linux and really transforming it to make it more suitable for automotive applications. So it's a real-time operating system. They're making it more secure, more reliable, so that it can function over the long haul in these types of vehicles.
Right. Well, and so is that an effort that they sort of slept on for a while and now they're playing catch up, or they're just because Honda already has automotive grade Linux in its cars, right?
They have Linux, but not automotive grade Linux.
Okay.
A lot of manufacturers have been basically they've been rolling their own Linux distributions for automotive applications for probably a better part of 10 years in a variety of areas. Like GM, the Cadillac Q system was running on Linux, and some of their other infotainment systems ran on Linux, but it wasn't, it was, they had to basically hack it themselves to get it into an automotive application. Now there's a whole organization specifically targeted at developing automotive grade Linux. And there's a lot of OEMs that are part of this partnership to develop this and test it and deploy it in vehicles.
Well, to be fair, so I this week, a little preview for next week, I have the Toyota Prius, which is brand new, and that has an 11.5-inch touchscreen in it. That's really nice. And that interface seems to be working pretty well.
That's the plug-in, the Prius Prime?
No, this is just the Prius, limited HV.
Oh, okay. So they put the bigger screen, because they used to only have that larger screen in the Prime, in the plug-in hybrid. So that must be...
Yeah, no, it's big. It's very, very nice. This one is I think it's a 20... I could be making this up. I don't know what year it is. It doesn't jump right out at me.
It's okay. I don't know what year it is either.
Oh, it's a 2019. I'm sorry. It's a 2019. But this one only has 400 miles on it. So everything is working. The Sirius XM and everything is working on it. But you're right. I mean, so I think the Toyota is moving towards some of these larger screens. And Dan, you're absolutely right. It's a very harsh environment. It's a good description. It is. It's a very demanding, very harsh environment. That's expected to last 12 years.
Yeah.
Minimum.
And actually, I think IHS just came out with their latest numbers. The average age of cars in the U.S. now is 11.8 years. And, it's not at all uncommon to have cars that are upwards of 20 years old. Like, I have a car in my garage that is almost 30 years old now.
That thing is fabulous, by the way.
Cars are very expensive, you see. And we've got an entire generation or two saddled with other kind of debt. Yeah. So I would expect that fleet age to just continue going up for a while. And so this stuff is just going to have to work, I'm curious to see what the aftermarket does with it. But to actually get back to the RC too, what really strikes me is that this is a Supra, and so I'm curious as to why they didn't take the RC and make the Supra out of that, and they co-developed the Supra with BMW and developed an all new platform or an all new model on BMW's platform versus taking what they already had that was pretty close. It's a two-door coupe. It seems
except the platform that they're using for the Supra is lighter, and it has an inline 6-cylinder engine, which is what a Supra apparently should have. That's what they've always had, and I think it was intended more as a performance vehicle, whereas as Rebecca said, this is really more of a luxury coupe that happens to be fairly sporty.
Yeah, and there's a lot, that Supra name carries a lot with it. And as Sam said, there's just things that the Supra should have.
Buyers.
And so I think that's that too. But if you're going to bring a brand, a name like that back, I think you have to have a certain amount of heritage there.
That's fair. It's fair. I mean, the RC is just it's this interesting car. It looks really great on the road. The infotainment issues you probably had with it too is it compared to the Prius that you said has a newer screen. It makes me wonder if they've prioritized the Prius buyer is going to expect this and they're going to utilize it. So we're going to
sure.
And it's also been refreshed, I think, since the RC. But
right.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. What are you guys driving?
Yeah, Sam. What are you riding around in? You want to stay on the Toyota?
I was briefly in the RAV4, and Rebecca and I talked about this on the last episode. We had to send it back early because it was having Bluetooth issues. When I connected my phone to it, it was constant. It would start to reset the whole infotainment system about every 30 seconds. So that was not good. So they took that one back to get it checked out, and they sent me a Camry Hybrid XLE, which is the high end, pretty much loaded version of the Camry Hybrid, and it's a very fuel efficient sedan. We've talked about the Camry before. It's I think this current generation is actually pretty decent looking. It drives much better than in the past, because it's on that TNGA platform that we've talked about, and almost everything about it is actually really good. I just wish that Toyota, particularly the Toyota brand, would take a clue from Hyundai and Kia and use some decent displays for their infotainment systems. Because this one, like so many Toyotas I've driven in the past, the screen, well, you know how I feel about touchscreens, but just as a display, regardless of whether you touch it or not, as a display, it's a terrible display. Especially in sunlight. If you wear polarized sunglasses, you get that whole rainbow effect on the display. And same thing, this one has a heads-up display in it, the optional heads-up display, and the HUD basically disappears when I put on my sunglasses. So it's really not good, and that's unfortunate because so much of the rest of the car works so well. It shouldn't be that hard to get a decent display to put in this thing. And most other manufacturers are doing a lot better with that. Like I said, the ones that Hyundai and Kia uses, the displays they use, not a problem at all wearing sunglasses. They're still nice and bright. They don't have glare. Toyota still uses these very shiny, the high gloss displays, like you find on a lot of laptops that, tend to amplify the contrast of it, but it also means you have a lot of glare when the sun is shining in at various angles coming through the windows, which also makes it difficult to see. So these things are, they're things that really hurt the everyday user experience in this thing. But other than that, the rest of the car works really well. It's pretty much loaded. It's got the navigation package, the driver assist package, the lane keeping system is the only part of the driver assist that's okay. It's not great in its performance and its ability to kind of keep the car centered in the lane. It does tend to drift a little bit from side to side, but other than that, the other parts of it work really well. At $38,215 delivered, it's not an inexpensive car.
It's not that expensive though. 38 grand for
no, and you can get a Camry Hybrid, for $26,000 too. So this is the luxury edition. Excuse me. So you've got leather seating and everything. It's got a lot of room inside. Good sized trunk in it. So if you're looking for a good mid-sized family sedan, for the 3 or 4 of you out there that are still doing that, this is a really good choice. Same warning as with the Lexus, it still doesn't have support for Android Auto. For the moment, that's still limited to the Avalon, but I think the 2020 models will get that upgrade. So this is still a 2019 model that I was driving. And the Blue Streak metallic paint looks really great on this thing. So, it's a good mid-sized sedan.
Yeah, it's a one of the few of a dying breed. Although I heard I read a headline. I saw it scroll by that said millennials are moving back to sedans, which I don't know how true that is. We talked about this a little bit before. There's still a sedan market. It's going to contract a little bit.
It's still a good size market. I mean, Toyota still sells 300,000 Camrys a year. I mean, it's not quite as big as it used to be, but it's still a big market. And one thing about Toyota is that they have really committed to doing a lot of the driver assist features as standard equipment across all of their lineup. So, like most of their other models now, the Camry has their Safety Sense P package as standard. So that means that you get pre-collision warning with pedestrian detection, full speed stop and go, adaptive cruise control, lane departure warning, blind spot monitoring, automatic high beams, and the rear cross traffic alert, all standard equipment, even on the base model, on the least expensive model. So, you're going to get all those safety features, no matter what price point you get it at.
But I think they're also playing catch up a little bit, because wasn't Honda the first one to do that? I mean, maybe I'm believing their press release, but
Honda was the first to make it available across the lineup on all their trim levels on the when they launched the new Civic.
Oh, I thought they made it standard.
Honda only made it standard. They made it standard when they launched the new Accord a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And they made it standard on the Civic for 2019. But Toyota was the first to make it standard across the board on a whole bunch of models, including the Camry, the Corolla, and several others.
Okay. Well, good on them. I think that's really it's so important for those to be standard. So that's good.
Especially in a family vehicle, it seems like that's something that they can really point at and say, like, we've got these things in here to make you safe, and it's a good selling point.
Yeah, and on every vehicle, I mean, these are features that are now becoming relatively commoditized. They're not that expensive to implement, and especially when you do it in high volumes like this, and it makes a big difference. Think especially things like blind spot monitoring, cross traffic alert, and adaptive cruise control. Those three, I think, are the really big ones that are really important.
Rear cross traffic alert. Did you say that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. So can I tell a quick funny story? So
sure.
I was helping my sister and my brother-in-law buy a new to them used vehicle. And I'm trying to explain to my brother-in-law, who is a banker and accounts for every penny that goes in and out of his bank account. Good for him. And I'm trying to explain to him the benefits of things like blind spot monitoring. And he doesn't want to hear it. He doesn't care. He's never seen this technology. Both their cars are over 10 years old, doesn't care. So we go to this Novak Motors on Long Island. That was excellent. I think I had mentioned it a couple of podcasts ago. Had a really terrific experience there. But when we get there, there's two Jeep Grand Cherokees, and they're almost exactly spec'd the same. But one has blind spot monitoring, but it's like $2,000 more because it's a little bit newer. I said to my sister, look, you really need to look at this vehicle. It's got blind spot monitoring, blah, blah, blah. She doesn't even talk to her husband about it, won't even mention it, because I am clearly beating a dead horse. Fine. So she buys the one that doesn't have the blind spot monitoring, and she loves the Jeep, thrilled with it. My brother-in-law drives it for the first time this weekend, and the first thing he says to her is, wait, why doesn't it tell me when there's a car in my way or in my lane or in the next lane? And she looks at him and says, because that's blind spot monitoring, and you said you didn't want it. And the very first thing he points out is the one thing that I tried to tell him that you need to have. And it was both justice and frustrating at the same time, because now they have a car that doesn't have it. And all he could say was, oh.
That's why you should always let the wife make these decisions.
Or at least listen to the sister-in-law who does this for a living.
I find that I get The first question I ask when people ask me about cars is, like, well, I'm looking to buy a car. What should I buy? What are you looking at? Okay, great. What do you like? Like, what's your favorite of those? Okay, buy that one.
Right? Well, that's kind of where I got to, because he had a budget in mind, and the one with the blind spot monitoring was over his budget, and that was it. But as soon as he didn't have it, then he was like, but wait a minute. What about that?
It's an insurance feature, really. It helps you make sure you're not going to crack up your new car.
Exactly. And, I think it was also, it's representative, though, of how these things need to be demonstrated. I don't want to get us off on a tangent on this because we talked about it before, but it's, when you're going to look at a new to you car, driving these cars, trying them out, seeing what it's like to have it and what it's like to not have it, I think it's so important. It's one of the key things, I think, when we're thinking about, helping people buy cars.
Absolutely.
So thank you for telling my story. Thank you for telling my little story.
I'm glad it didn't take an accident for that to happen. I was waiting for that. Because you see that all the time. No. You see like the shiny, nice new car that somebody's had for a couple of weeks, and they've already backed it into something.
Well, on the test drive, my sister said, she knew that there was a car in her lane, but she couldn't tell if he was still there or not. Like, he had been there, and then it turned out that he had made the right-hand turn into a parking lot. And I said to her, that's what blind spot monitoring helps you with. But they still didn't get it. So there's only so much you can do.
It's their money.
Yes, exactly.
So I drove a car that did not have blind spot monitoring. I don't even think it's available.
What?
Which is one of the knocks. So I went down to South Carolina, and so I called up our friends at BMW, and they were gracious enough to lend me and my coterie, my family, a X2 M35i to use while we were down there. And so we got to pick it up at the factory, which is really cool because I don't know.
That is super cool.
Like what your image of an auto factory is, but a lot of people would think like it's just a super industrial site and it's a smoke belching thing. Nope. It's just like a clean office park. No. It's enormous.
That plant is incredible. That Spartanburg plant.
It is. It's neatly landscaped. It is huge. We drove around like the whole thing. I was like,
it's BMW's biggest factory and their biggest global factory.
It's really, really impressive. And what's the most impressive is just it just tucks neatly into the countryside down there, and it doesn't. There's no like apparent disgusting pollution or anything like that. It seems like a really clean, self-contained thing. So that it was cool. And apparently they've run out of space where they are, and they're going to tunnel under the highway and start expanding over there as well. So I'm sure it's a big employer in that area, and it's great that they're there sort of driving the economy, because we also went to downtown Greenville, and clearly the economy is doing pretty well there. It seems like there's a good benefit from having multiple. I think Volvo is also right down in the area with their S60 plant now, or whatever they're going to make there.
Yeah, they're not far from there. And for what it's worth, when we think about all the trade wars going on right now, it's important to remember that places like that, the BMW plant in Spartanburg is actually the biggest exporter of vehicles from the United States of any factory.
I think it's 85%.
Wow.
Of all their vehicles are exported.
I knew it was big. But
no, I don't think it's quite that high. I think it's closer to about 2/3, but.
Okay, maybe it's a certain model. They do
sell a lot of those SUVs here. Yeah, right. Certain models like the X6 and some of the others, are predominantly exported because they're much more popular overseas.
And every single one of those is made here. Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. Because they had told me, they'd given me some figures when I was in Munich about it, and this was last year when the trade wars were just bubbling up. And how frustrating it was for them because they're a big employer and they export a ton.
Yeah. I mean, it was just, it's really cool to see that going on because especially in the South, like that's an area that economically you think of as struggling to a certain degree. Manufacturing has just moved out in other industries. So to see it there and that vibrant, it was awesome. So I was really pleased that we were able to go see that and pick up the car at the factory. And Sam, you were saying that they actually have a natural gas pipeline from the landfill, so they get a percentage of their power, and I think they have solar on site as well.
They generate almost all their power on site using biogas that's piped in from the neighboring landfill.
I mean, that's.
So instead of the landfill venting off methane into the atmosphere, they just pipe it in over to the plant, scrub it, and use it to generate electricity.
That's great. I was really impressed with that. It was a good start to the trip, and the fact that we had an X2 M35i also didn't hurt in some ways. There are some criticisms of this car. So the sort of hit list is that it's too small, it's too stiff, it's too expensive, has weird throttle response, poor visibility, no steering feel. And, I can get behind some of that, but, I wished for better steering feel. I did find myself wandering around in lanes a little bit if I momentarily attended to iDrive or something. And it is stiff, but it's the M35i. You know what you're buying. So steering feel, that's a valid criticism. Got it. It's on run flats. I think it was on 20-inch run flats, which sort of they make it stiff, and I think they suck some of the steering feel out of it. BMW steering feel has been a bone of contention over the last couple of years. So, okay, that's fine. Size-wise, I really, again, it's the compact utility. Yes, an X1 is a little bit more versatile, but this car brings with it a certain load of styling, and everybody agrees that it looks fantastic because it does. It looks really good. So it's entertaining to park it somewhere and walk away and glance back at it. It's a good looking car.
I think it's great. I think those are super fun. I had one last year that I just loved zipping around in it. It was awesome.
So the throttle response thing, I in comfort and eco pro modes, it definitely it does have a little bit of, it's not really hesitation and it's not lag. I think it's more just it's tuned to deliver some better fuel economy.
Right, I was going to say it's a fuel economy thing.
Put it in sport mode, it's very responsive. It's right there. And I did find myself using sport mode a lot just because I wanted that responsiveness. For stuff like the highways are under construction in this area, so there are times where you've got tight merges and short ramps and stuff, and you just want to make sure that the car is going to do what you ask it to do when you ask it to do it. You put it in sport mode, and that's fine. And then when you want to relax, you put it in Eco Pro, and it smooths everything out, modulates everything. But yeah, space was fine for, relatively.
Were there three of you or four of them? Oh, wow. That's awesome.
I found that I could easily sit behind myself in terms of having the seat adjusted. I do think that if, somebody's a little taller in the front, you're going to have a tighter back seat. Cargo space isn't huge, but it was fine. It put most of our luggage in it without an issue, without it feeling really tight. So, again, you're not necessarily buying the X2 for its maximum utility. You're buying it because of how it looks and how it makes you feel. And
you're buying it for the occasional utility, right? It's not like if you need something every single day, then you may get something different. But no, I agree. I think it looks great.
If you do need the maximum utility, you buy an X1 or an X3, not the X2.
And so that's their same sausage, different lengths kind of thing, right? Like they've got you covered if that's what you want. And if you wanted an X1 but you wanted it a little more sleek, here you go. Here's an X2. So the visibility also I didn't think was poor. The rear window is small, but the mirrors are good, and get the lack of blind spot monitoring. It will be probably an issue for some people. I don't even think it's available, and at $53,000, I think was what this one's stickered for. It might have even been higher. It seems like a weird omission.
That seems really weird.
Yeah.
How were the seats?
The seats were fantastic because it had the M Sport seats, and it had the magma red Napa leather. So it was white on the outside with the black shadow line, or with the shadow line trim. So white and black on the outside, and then just this red. It's really orange leather.
That's gorgeous.
And it was just, cannot state how much I loved how it looked. And the M Sport seats are fantastic.
So is blind spot monitoring not available?
Yeah.
Or did that one just not seem to have it?
No, I think it's not available.
That doesn't seem.
Yeah, it's it wasn't on the last X2 that I drove, the regular regular X2. And I'm looking at the BMW website right now, and it doesn't look like it's available on any X2, including the M35i.
Why? That doesn't make any sense.
It seems a little bit weird that it's not, and there must be some reason. Because I mean, if they could add it and charge you for it, they will, because it's BMW.
Yeah, I mean, generally BMW is more than happy to add, all the conceivable options you would want, and
yes, we have blind spot monitoring. That'll be an extra $1,500, please.
I think that's a legitimate question that we need to pose to BMW, because that it seems like a really remedial, as we talked about, that seems like something that everything has these days. Every brand has that. Has blind spot monitoring.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. I will say, like, it wasn't an issue for me, but I can see for some drivers just having that peace of mind, it would be. Well,
especially in the X2, because I think you do have a little bit worse visibility to the rear corners than you do in an X1 or an X3. The pillars are a little thicker. The roof line is a little shorter. So you're a little more enclosed in there. And so I think having something like blind spot monitoring would be a real benefit.
I agree. Again, even if it's just for peace of mind, so you can see the lights or something, so you know that there's something there. It's just sort of like a double check. But the overall experience of the X2 is great. And in terms of, how it goes, it's really entertaining to drive, especially in sport mode, and it makes all the right sounds. The transmission's really well matched. It will downshift when you decelerate and stuff. It seems to handle pretty well. I didn't wring it out that much in a strange state on strange roads, but
with strange drivers.
Yeah, very, very, very different down there. And it's an entertaining package. And so the price being up in the 50s made me. It was not breathtaking, and I think the knock on the M35i is too expensive is kind of misplaced, because you know what you're buying. It's the same as knocking it for being too stiff. No, you know what you're buying. If you want something less stiff, buy the the 28i, whatever they call it, the X-Drive 28i, which is, it'll be a little softer. It'll be mostly the same thing. It looks just as good. It still looks good. It doesn't look just as good. It certainly has a little sporty edge. It's a M35. But you're buying a premium car. So you know what you're in for. And if you want a cheaper car, buy a cheaper car. That's the best advice I can give there.
And there are plenty of more affordable options. You don't have to have a. You don't have to.
Well,
and
the same set of hardware is the Mini Countryman. I will say, like, in the past, I've said, and the Countryman is significantly less expensive, but the character is quite different. So even though they're the same thing, they're not really the same. You know what I mean? Like, they're the same under the skin. Well, and I don't think you can get a Countryman with the 300 horsepower engine. I don't think it goes that high. I think even the John Cooper Works Countryman is still only about 220. It's less than that. Yeah,
and it's a really very different ownership experience.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's just the BMW is very BMW, and the Mini is very Mini. They have that distinct character, and I certainly liked that. iDrive has been refined to the point where, in a weird place, but I can use the nav to find what I'm looking for in multiple different ways. It all works very well, and BMW's consistency is really welcome, because our travel day, our first travel day, was like the multimodal hellscape. And so getting into this BMW after dealing with airlines and lost luggage and just whatever other nonsense, traffic jams in Boston and getting there late and weather delays, it was just like sitting in this thing like, okay, all right, everything is familiar. I've never driven the X2 before, but I've driven a bunch of BMWs, and so everything works the way it works in BMWs, and that's great. And I think it was just a reminder of how having such a clear vision about how the car operates, and also executing it very well, it really pays dividends, and it's a very familiar experience. And I think that's why BMW has some loyal ownership too. It's so consistent across the years that you know what you're getting, you know what to expect, you know how the thing's going to behave, and so it was a really nice car to have as cool, pseudo rental instead of a beat up Sonata or something that would have been fine as well. But you ask for favors when you can get them, and it was so. I appreciate BMW lending us the car. And then we came back to a Jetta GLI, which is also kind of stiff and lacks steering feel. So, I don't want to talk too much about the Jetta because I haven't really finished up my time with it, but it's a good sort of semi-sporty economical. I won't call it economy, but economical sedan.
It's essentially a 4-door, sedan GTI.
Yeah, it's not quite as charming as a GTI. It handles well, and it has, decent powertrain. But this is the GLI S, I guess. So it's the lowest trim level of the GLI. So whatever. I don't know. I think that's what it says. I haven't spent a whole lot of time with it, but it seems a little base model-ish. So I'm adjusting to it. I want to give it a fair shake. So we'll talk about it more next week. And let's move out of the garage onto some.
But I will say that to think about going on a plant tour on vacation with your family.
Yeah,
it's not usually at the top of the list, but if you're in that area, that plant is amazing.
No, it would have been cool. I should have set it up because there was a bunch of young men all between 11 and 13, 14 with us that probably would have very much been interested in it. So,
and the girls.
Yeah. I mean, understandably, the girls might have been a little less interested, but they would have played along. So.
That depends on the girls.
It depends on the girls because it's actually really cool going to depending upon what you do. But sometimes it can be really cool.
And speaking of plant tours, if you happen to be in Southeast Michigan, and you want to see, a great plant to take a tour of that's open all the time, the Ford truck plant in Dearborn. They do tours of that place all the time. They have shuttle buses that go from the Henry Ford Museum, and it's a really cool tour. You get to walk around. You walk around up above the plant, up above the main plant floor, and you go through all the different parts of the plant. You get to see the body shop and assembly and everything, and you see how they crank those things out. About one a minute. 24 hours a day.
That's a crazy pace. Wow. That's 1 a minute, man. that's a lot of trucks.
Yeah, they do about 60 an hour.
Yeah, I was a little I was kicking myself that I didn't schedule a plant tour, but we made up for it. We went to downtown Greenville, which I also, if you're in that area, it's cool.
Greenville's a nice place.
I was impressed. There's a lot of life there. So that's our travel log for this week. I feel like we've turned into Rick Steves or something. So all right, let's move on to some topics. Let's talk about a couple of things. The first thing on our list was Sam. You had put a link to a test that Regulus Cyber, I think is the name of the company, did some spoofing tests on a Tesla Model 3 and a Model S, basically to confuse the autopilot system and hack it and basically make the car do stuff it's not supposed to do. And so the outcome of the test showed some pretty eye-opening vulnerabilities of the Model 3 in particular. And I'm just curious if they picked the Tesla because it's so popular, and it does this hacking test really apply to other cars as well?
Yeah, so the reason why they use the Tesla is because Tesla is the first to implement this idea of navigate on autopilot, which is an on-ramp to off-ramp automation system. You engage it as you're getting onto the highway, and you put in your destination as you would with any other nav system, and then it does most of the driving while you're on the highway, and will even guide you to it will do the lane change to the off ramp, and then you have to take over again. What Regulus did was they demonstrated something that's already fairly well known, which is the concept of spoofing GPS. So for those that aren't familiar with how GPS works, you've got this constellation of satellites floating around in space above us, and they're all synced up. And there's actually multiple of these. There's the Global Positioning System is the U.S. system, and then there's also the GLONASS system, which is the Russian version of this, and Europe has their own that's called Galileo. They all function basically the same way. All the satellites in the constellation are synchronized together, and they send messages down to receivers on the ground, and the messages include a timestamp. So they've got the ID of the satellite and the timestamp, and the receiver knows where the satellite is, and because of the amount of time, depending on where you are, it's going to take different amounts of time to get a signal from each of those satellites. So if you're sitting directly under one of the satellites, that's going to be the shortest distance to that satellite. And so you're going to have the shortest time. Any satellite that's further away from you is going to have a little bit more of a time skew on it.
Triangulation.
Based on those,
it's basically, yeah.
Yeah. So based on those differences in the time signal, the system can calculate what your position is. That's assuming that all those signals come to you in a straight line and they don't bounce off of anything like tall buildings. If you've ever driven around in a city like New York or Chicago, in an urban area where there's a lot of tall buildings, you may have noticed that your navigation system will oftentimes tell you that you are 3 or 4 blocks away from where you actually are, because if the signal bounces back and forth a few times, it actually ends up having to go a little bit farther, and it changes that time skew, and it miscalculates where you are.
You can't even get FM radio in the city sometimes.
That's true. So what the crew at Regulus did was they used this principle. And the other thing about GPS and all these others is these signals from the satellites are actually fairly weak. And so if you have a very strong local signal that is broadcasting, it can easily overwhelm the signal from the satellites. And so what they did was they set up a system to broadcast essentially GPS signals at a Tesla that was driving by, and it overwhelmed the signals from the satellites and they made it think that the car was somewhere further down the road than it actually was. And because the navigator on autopilot is relying on that GPS information, and it was going to get off at an off ramp about a mile down the road, it actually ended up turning off at a rest area before it was supposed to. And so this is something that they're working on trying to improve. But this is one of the reasons why for most other autonomous systems that aren't coming from Tesla, they're not relying just solely on GPS. They're relying on other things as well to help figure out where the car is on the planet. They're using things like high definition maps, which use they're map systems that have all the features on the ground, buildings and bridges and everything else with the location of those, and then using the sensors on the car to calculate from where it sees all these objects around you, where you actually are. So it's triangulating off of physical objects instead of these radio signals from the satellites. And then you can cross-check those two against each other to make sure that that you're actually where you think you are. So this is one of the problems with Tesla's approach to this, is they're not putting in enough redundancy, especially in areas like this where there are known weaknesses. GPS has known weaknesses. It's an incredibly valuable system, but it's not perfect. And so, other companies are relying on multiple ways of figuring out the location of the car in order to navigate to a particular location.
So I guess like those those other systems the systems that other automakers are implementing, is that why they're further behind in rolling something out? I mean, the only real sort of competitor to navigate on autopilot would be like Super Cruise, and it's not there. It's a lot more cautious in that respect. Is that because they're being more careful?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. You know, everybody else is I think taking a little more care in how they're implementing this, you know, to try to avoid some of the. They're thinking about what are the ways that this could go wrong, and trying to avoid those. And they're building in systems to work around that, you know, so that you don't have a single point of failure. And, you know, I mean, a perfect example of you know, where this can go wrong is the Boeing 737 MAX, you know, which had a single point of failure with an angle of attack sensor and made 2 planes crash. You know, so for safety critical systems like this, you don't want to rely on just a single input. You want to have at least 2, preferably 3 inputs that are looking at different things to try to get you the same information, that so you can cross check them against each other, and make sure that that it's actually seeing what it thinks it's seeing.
So basically, there weren't any redundancies on this thing? That's crazy.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But it's also cheaper.
Yeah, I mean, so that they have to like subscribe to.
So do you want cheap or do you want good?
I want both.
Look, I can drive myself for free. They'd have to subscribe to like the other map data, right? Like that's another map supplier.
They could get it from various map suppliers. Like, for example, Nissan a few weeks ago announced their ProPilot 2.0 system. You know, they've got the current one that's on the market today, which is adaptive cruise and some lane centering capability. Version 2 is going to include high definition maps, and it's going to have the same kind of hands off, you know, on ramp to off ramp type of capability as autopilot, but they are using HD maps for that system. Super Cruise also uses HD maps, but they're not doing on ramp to off ramp, but it is a hands off system, and they're just using the maps right now just for geofencing to make sure that you only engage it on divided highways. So there's companies like TomTom and Here that are offering commercial solutions. Nissan is actually using a solution from Mobileye called Roadbook. And for the high level automation stuff, right now, the level 4 automated vehicles are coming from companies like Waymo and Cruise and Ford and Argo. A lot of those companies are actually doing their own maps in-house, rather than using external maps.
That seems expensive. Is that because they want to make sure that they're getting the data the way they need it?
Exactly. Yeah, they want to have it formatted the way they need it, you know, to match what their sensors are seeing, and also, you know, a lot of the commercial solutions right now don't have enough coverage. And, you know, most of the testing that's going on with the you know, systems from Waymo and Cruise and others are limited to very specific cities and locations. And, you know, so when they started doing this, there weren't HD maps available. So they built up their own systems for doing the HD maps. And at least for the time being, they're planning on continuing to use their own maps rather than licensing maps. But at some point, they may end up licensing maps from one of these other providers.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess if you've got your own stuff and you trust it, might as well use it. So, what does this mean for the pace of autonomous vehicle rollout? Like, it's going to be a while before.
Yeah, it's going to be slow. It's you know, it's not going to happen in 2020. There aren't going to be a million robo-taxis in or at least not a million safe robo-taxis in 2020.
How dare you contradict Elon Musk?
What can I say?
Well, you know, and I guess one last thing that makes me curious is so that whole comparison, right? The comparing physical landmarks to map position data, is that what they're using stuff from like NVIDIA or other GPU hardware to basically do that processing horsepower of just sort of recognizing objects and then saying, okay, this correlates to that thing, and we know it's a known location because it's the physical thing, Like that seems like it's kind of processor intensive or like horsepower intensive.
Yeah, that is part of it. One of the other advantages you can get out of having those HD maps, though, is in some ways you can actually reduce the amount of processing power required. Like for example, Argo, they have their HD maps, and in addition to the buildings and stuff as you drive down the road, it also has the locations of things like traffic signals and signs. So, as the car drives down the road, it knows exactly where to look for the signals and signs. And so instead of scanning the entire scene that, what the entire area that the sensors can see looking for traffic signals, it's, based on where it knows it is, it can say, oh, there should be a traffic signal right here. And it can focus on a smaller area for trying to recognize the traffic signals. And then that actually reduces the amount of processing power required because it doesn't have to process the entire image looking for that.
That's almost like a person would do.
Yeah, it's strange how that works.
It's going to be great when it actually... Well, no, it's not going to be great. It's going to be creepy. It's going to be weird. Again, there are no fully automated cars on the road, despite what you may hear or read or see.
Just because you have paid for a full self-driving feature on your car doesn't mean that you actually have that capability. So please, unless you're driving a car with GM Super Cruise or ProPilot 2.0, keep your hands on the steering wheel. Do not take a nap.
Well, and I guess that's the key too. Is like the first day, the test that they did where they were able to make the Model 3 veer off, 500 feet or something short of where it was expected, where the driver expected to go was, and that caught the driver by surprise, even in this test where the driver had his hands in his lap. So he wasn't able to actually catch it and keep it back on the highway. It had already initiated an exit and it was too late to safely re-enter the traffic. So, it's still the Wild West. That's great. It's terrifying. It's going to be awesome when I get to mix it up on Boston roads with those cars.
Hey, Aptiv's already doing that with their crew from Nutonomy.
Yeah, are they still? They had been testing down in the seaport. I'm not sure if they.
Yeah, they still are.
Yeah, it's a safe enough place. I mean, let's hit a few people down there. It's fine. All right. So the other thing that you and Rebecca both attended was the FCA What's New, and so that's always a really cool event because while people will say like, well, FCA, Dodge, Chrysler, they're domestic brands, Dodge, Chrysler, Jeep, Ram. Really, there's just only signs of life at like Jeep and Ram for the most part. Like Dodge and Chrysler seem a little bit fallow, but that's actually not the case.
Not necessarily.
Yeah. So you guys saw some stuff. So tell us about it a little bit.
Well, first, there's been an executive change also. So Jim Morrison is now running Jeep, and I've known Jim a long time, not the singer. And he is a Canadian guy who loves this brand and just understands it, is so excited about it. He had been running Ram for a while, and now he's back at Jeep, and it's exactly where he belongs. So that was really great and exciting news. And I think he's perfect to run the brand. So that's on the executive side of things.
Yeah, he had been running it a while ago. That's where he came from, right?
Right. He came from Jeep.
Yeah, before Mike Manley was running it, Jim was running it.
Right. So it's a great move back for him. So it's exciting. And
Mike Manley, of course, is now the CEO of FCA since the death of Sergio Marchionne last summer.
Right. So now Mike is running the company. And it was interesting talking to some people about that because I said, what are some of the biggest differences? And they said, well, actually, Mike all he does is run FCA as opposed to, 6 other companies. And so they said it's just a lot easier to keep track of what's happening.
But does he chain smoke like Sergio?
He does. I don't believe so, but I don't know. But so anyway, but I think, to your point, Dan, I think there's actually a lot of really cool stuff going on at Dodge, and they're just so unapologetically muscle car oriented. And I think that's great. I love that. So Sam, I know you want to talk about the wide body and what they showed.
Yeah. So yeah, we saw yet another iteration of the Charger this week, the 2020 Dodge Charger wide body, which, like the Challenger wide body, gets wider fender flares, revised suspension front and rear that makes the car about 3.5 inches wider. And gives it an even more aggressive look. And on the Charger, the 4-door Charger, it's available with either the Hellcat engine, the 707 horsepower Hellcat, or the 6.4 liter Hemi in the Scat Pack. And basically what you're getting here is just a slightly more practical version of the high performance Challengers, but with all the other same mechanical bits in it. And it's funny, I was joking the other day, it's starting to look like the Dodge Charger and Challenger are the new Morgan. It's the Morgan for the 21st century. Morgan built basically the same cars for 60 years or more, and is still building those cars. And, the Charger and Challenger, they're going, they're about 12 years now, 12, 13 years into their run and still going strong.
Yeah.
And the thing Tim Kuniskis was saying was, last year was, 2018 was one of their best years yet for those two models. They
amazing.
Sold over 150,000 of those.
So, yeah, I was thinking about this the other day. So one of the ways that I first got into cars was, basically through a model that had been in production for nearly 20 years. And then like basically rear wheel drive Volvos. So I started with the 240. The 240 went from 75 to 93. That's almost 20 years. And there were changes in there, but I was thinking if they keep the Charger and Challenger around for just a little bit longer, or even just right now, like the first few model years, those cars are cheap enough now that somebody can buy one for like $1,000 or $2,000, and you can assemble one as your first car, like I did with my first cars. And so that's going to be an entry point. If it isn't already, it will be soon. So I don't know. Some of that like enthusiast future seems bright because those cars have been around for so long. If that makes any sense, I'm just trying to relate it to my experience.
It does. And we've talked at length about this in the past and how much we like driving those things. It's a really good solid platform. Good powertrains. Even the V6, even the Pentastar V6 is a really good option in those things. As an entry point, you've still got almost 300 horsepower with that V6 engine. You get decent fuel economy, and it's relatively affordable, even as a new car. Much less an 8 or 9 or 10-year-old used one.
And they're just fun to drive. They're like nothing else on the road.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, they're sort of like a throwback, but they've got modern features. They're not I mean, they're big, but they're not ponderous. They drive with some discipline. But I guess that's also somewhat terrifying is how cheap they are with that big V8 and lots of speed.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's likely that there's going to be a lot of people that probably shouldn't be driving such a vehicle. But hey, what are you going to do?
But you know what? I love that what they've done with the Dodge brand, because it's such an emotional brand. And it's so unapologetically that way. And there's such a sense of passion. Like you can imagine the team, putting these cars together. Like they're like little boys and girls that are so excited about this, and the crayon drawings that they pull out, from their first, when they're 5 and 6 years old, and their Hot Wheel collection, and they're basically making life-size Hot Wheels. And that's awesome.
I love the cars. I hate the advertising, the way they've positioned it. Dodge in particular, just like, are you a jerk? We've got the car for you.
But so it's interesting, Dan, because years ago, my a former colleague and I, John Wilkonowitz, who's just fantastic, we looked at Dodge advertising. And this was in the heyday of That Thing Got a Hemi.
Yeah.
Right. And they had a campaign with Dr. Zetcha. And what the surveys showed was that people that were asked about both campaigns, the Dr. Z campaign, they thought he was a caricature. They had no idea that he was the president of the company. They couldn't understand his German accent. Like, there wasn't anything relatable with Dr. Z. This is in the Daimler Chrysler days, obviously. And That Thing Got a Hemi, that sort of that over the top, in your face kind of advertising, that's what appeals to these types of buyers.
Oh, I mean, as a bit of branding, it's brilliant because it's a catchphrase and it's easily portable. It's much more memorable. All of that is fine. It's just I think now, and I follow Dodge and Mopar on Twitter even, and just like all of the pictures they post are like sinister, and they show the blacked out car, and it's just like, you guys don't have to be. So it's very much like Harley's, same kind of thing.
Yeah.
They're trying to cultivate like, I'm a real badass kind of
right.
thing. It's like, no, you're just a dick. Stop it. Because the cars are really good. I love the cars. Even like you were saying, the V6, like the Challenger GT is one of my favorite cars because it's a pony car with a real trunk, and it's confident in pretty much every condition. It's comfortable. It has enough performance to keep you happy. It looks fantastic, and it's it's really well priced. So yeah, but moving beyond the marketing message, because that's not what we're here for. So you guys did a couple of things. The biggest, I guess, introductions that stood out to you were both the Chrysler Voyager and the wide body, like you talked about, and you also interviewed Jeff Lux, right, from FCA.
Jeff is the head of transmission and powertrain for Fiat Chrysler, and Rebecca and I sat down with him to talk about electrification and kind of where FCA stands on all that.
I'm surprised you didn't browbeat him into putting the Hellcat in everything. Like a Hellcat in a 500 would be fantastic.
Well, I don't think we actually needed to browbeat, because I'm pretty sure that is the plan, to eventually offer the Hellcat in everything that they can stuff it into. Certainly everything from Dodge. It's I'm pretty sure it's only a matter of time before we see a Durango Hellcat. It's already in the Grand Cherokee.
But I think one of the reasons that we wanted to talk to him before we get too far down this path is because of the amount of misconceptions that surround these brands. And this is part of the recording that we will put into this podcast.
Yeah, we'll tack it on at the end. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So just briefly, what were those misconceptions that you covered?
Well, just the idea that FCA as a company doesn't pay attention to fuel economy, or isn't concerned about fuel economy, and they actually are, and they have, they're very much in tune to what needs to happen with fuel economy and such. And so, it's just the idea that it isn't just about Hemi engines, and they're a more sophisticated company than just that.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're buying all those credits from Tesla. I'm just throwing rocks now. It's not on purpose.
Well, no, I mean, they have done some interesting stuff. Obviously, the Fiat 500e is clearly, a compliance car, in order to meet their requirements for the ZEV mandate in California. But, they've also been doing other stuff, like the Pacifica Hybrid, which we've talked about in the past, which is, an excellent vehicle. I
was going to say, it's actually really, really good.
Yeah, it's an amazing vehicle.
And then there's also
their TorqueFlite,
the e-torque system.
Right, the TorqueFlite, the 8 and 9-speed transmissions. I mean, they've got a lot more sophisticated technologies than people give them credit for.
Right, and I would not be the least bit surprised if one of the things we see next year at What's New is perhaps a Hellcat with the e-torque system on there. to boost the torque by another 130 foot-pounds, and also give it a couple more miles per gallon.
That'd be cool, actually. And that dovetails nicely with the Ferrari we're going to talk about in a moment. But did not Chrysler also just acquire some EV talent? I forget where they hired from. Somebody left from somewhere and went to Chrysler to sort of boost their EV program because.
Mickey Bly.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
They hired Mickey Bly to replace Bob Lee, who was formerly their vice president of powertrain. I met Mickey about a dozen years ago when he was at GM, and he was running the EV,
the Volt, right?
EV develop or the electric powertrain development for the Volt, and then he eventually went over to work at GM Europe for a while. Then he spent some time at a company called AVL, which is an engineering firm, and then he was at American Axle, or AAM, for the last couple of years before joining Fiat Chrysler about a month and a half ago.
Right. So we were talking about Chrysler sort of being behind the curve, or seemingly behind the curve on EVs and or electrification and hybrid, when they're kind of not, but also they're taking it seriously too. They're adding talent.
Yeah, I think where to say, I think where we could validly say that they're behind the curve is in terms of actually bringing production models to market. They haven't brought a whole lot of plug-in. They've brought only 2 plug-in vehicles to market, and so clearly compared to some brands, they have not been as aggressive there. That doesn't mean they're not working on this stuff, but they're looking at the market, and this is something we talked to Jeff Lux about, and the market just there isn't the consumer pull for electric vehicles yet, except for one particular brand, which happens to be Tesla, and there it's as much it appears to be as much about supporting Elon as it is about the fact that people necessarily want EVs, or certainly not EVs at those price points. I think there's a bunch of early adopters, that have bought Teslas, and there are people in the mainstream segment that would like an EV, but they're frankly just not affordable and convenient enough yet. They will get there, but they're not there yet. And that's why, EVs still remain only 1% of the market.
Right. And so just for reference, Mickey Bly was quoted in an article that just came out today, actually, talking about the creation of electrified versions of the Charger and Challenger. So he's confirmed that both cars will have an electrified installation at some point, which is very interesting. But I think that's one of the biggest things. And then also the next versions of the Dodge Charger and Challenger Hellcat will be hybrid. But there isn't, if there was the consumer pull on the market, if somebody is constantly tugging at your sleeve, you will give them what they want. But nobody is tugging at the sleeve. This is all pushing on the market through regulations. And it's why we continue to see alternative fuel vehicles of less than 5% of new cars. That includes hybrids and electrics.
Yeah, well, and there's so much uncertainty right now, given what may be potentially rolled back and what may be mandated, and what consumers are even going to ask for, and just in terms of the economy too. I heard today that they're talking about how the yield curve has been inverted for a quarter, and that's a really solid indicator over the last 60 years of an impending recession. So that'll be fun to see how that works out. So with that kind of uncertainty, when you're an automaker, you're going to be careful about where you invest your money. And FCA at the moment is, they're bringing in some revenue from their domestic brands. And I think the one last thing that we didn't quite get to yet was the Voyager. So for speaking more revenue, right? It's the value price model of the Pacifica. It's a little less cushy equipped, but is this basically intended to phase out the ancient Grand Caravan that continues to hang around?
It doesn't look like it yet, because I think the Grand Caravan, as long as it's still outselling the Pacifica, they'll probably keep building them.
Well, I think, but it outsells the Pacifica because fleets buy it and it's cheaper.
Right.
Right.
Well, the Voyager is replacing the low end, the L and LX trims of the Pacifica, and they haven't actually said. I don't know if you heard anything about pricing, Rebecca, but I haven't seen anything about specific pricing on the Voyager. So, I'm not sure actually how much cheaper than a Pacifica it's going to be. There is going to be one trim level that is actually for fleet only, the LXI trim level. And, that's going to have, leatherette seats and things like that, for extra durability. That'll be the rental fleet special. But aside from that, presumably it will be somewhat less expensive and decontented from the current base level Voyager Pacificas, but we don't know by how much yet.
Yeah, I mean, there's some indications that it would be around 29,000. I think the Pacifica.
Well, that's the same price as a current Pacifica LX or L.
Yeah, this is saying it directly replaces the Pacifica L and LX trims. It should start around 28,000. The Pacifica, meanwhile, starts at 35 for 2009 for the Touring Plus. So I would imagine then they're going to, what you're thinking is that it's going to be below 28, which is dirt cheap.
Well, yeah, it's dirt cheap until you compare it to the old Grand Caravan, which is dirt cheaper.
Not by much.
No, I mean, it's a couple thousand at least. It's
yeah, but 28,000. I mean, that's a pretty inexpensive car these days, especially a minivan.
Yeah.
With
I mean, if you compare it to the price of a Honda Odyssey or a Toyota Sienna, that is a pretty reasonable price.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, everything's gotten so expensive, and minivans are. Certainly price creep has sort of gotten up there. I'm curious as to why they're replacing Pacifica trims with another name. It almost sounds like they want to keep the Pacifica as sort of that, almost like the way they kept the Town and Country around.
Yes.
And they brought the Pacifica in at a higher price level, but if you wanted the van and you didn't want to pay that much, you can still buy the old Town and Country. So I called it the Grand Caravan. I'm sorry, the Town and Country. But the Voyager name, I think, will serve to have that value proposition. Like, okay, this is the cheap van, and the Pacifica still has those connotations of being nice.
I think that this is, we saw it. We used to see it at Kelley Blue Book when the names of models changed. The people didn't do a lot of research to find them. Like when Infiniti changed from the G, then people just, if they couldn't find the Infiniti G, they just thought it just went away and they went to used Gs. And so I think that, rather than to the Q, that it replaced it. So I think that this is an example of where people are looking at the pricing of the Pacifica. And I do think that as a company, FCA wants to keep that more premium, wants to keep it in that higher mode. And these other nameplates, something like the Voyager, it's more accessible to consumers, and they look and say, that's a brand that I remember as being more affordable.
Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing. I think it's just the value. They're trying to hit the lower price and not ding the Pacifica name.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Curiouser and curiouser. But let's go to expensive stuff and talk about the Ferrari F90 Stradale, which is SF90 Stradale. I'm sorry. That's a hybrid. Like you were talking about the Hellcat with the e-torque. It's a V8 with
this is a strong hybrid.
Yeah,
not just a mild hybrid.
It's a strong hybrid, and Ferrari cannot help themselves. Complete obfuscation with the horsepower numbers. They say it's got 1,000, almost 1,000 horsepower, 986 horsepower, but the way they added up all the outputs is odd.
Yeah, well, I mean, they've released a video that's got that shows the several different hybrid modes that you can, or several different modes you can operate in. So they're, for the full 986 horsepower, you have to put it in qualify mode, which lets loose everything that the twin turbo V8 has with 769 horsepower, plus the 3 electric motors, 2 in the front, 1 in the rear for another 217 horsepower. There's also a regular hybrid mode, which is for more normal driving. There's a performance mode in there somewhere. And there's also a mode that's labeled as ED for electric driving. Which
I thought ED was more of a Corvette thing, but okay.
Well, yeah. So,
it's a slow burn. It's a slow burn.
The funny thing about ED is that it's at least in this Ferrari, is that it's only sending power to the front motors. So when you're driving in pure electric mode in this Ferrari, you will have a front wheel drive Ferrari.
Well, I mean, that's not unprecedented. The FF had front wheel drive too, kind of. It was 4-wheel drive. It could transfer most of its torque all to the front wheels, if I recall.
Yeah, but it was never front wheel drive only. It was, it was always sending power to all 4.
Yeah, I guess it's true.
Yeah. So, in the electric mode, you can get 15 miles as a front wheel drive coupe. Just like like a Hyundai Veloster.
Well, that's probably all it's going to be driven in any given Saturday. It's going to sort of toddle along to Cars and Coffee and then toddle along back to its climate-controlled garage for its next engine-out service. So it seems fine.
Or, for when you want to drive into central London, go down to Harrods, to do some shopping. You can drive it. You can avoid the congestion charge and just put it in electric mode and toddle on down to Harrods.
Yeah, I mean, cynicism aside, they continue to. This is really racing technology, right? It's like.
Oh yeah, I mean this is the sort of stuff that we have seen for the last 6 years in the LMP1 class in Le Mans. With the now defunct Audis and Porsches and the Toyotas that have won the 24 Hours Le Mans the last 2 years. They have hybrid systems like this that provide all-wheel drive capability with electric drive to the front axles, energy recuperation. The one thing that's different about this one, about the Ferrari, is that it has a considerably larger battery at 7.9 kilowatt hours, and it's actually a plug-in hybrid. So you can actually plug this thing in, making it the first Ferrari to do this. The LaFerrari was also a hybrid, but it had a much smaller battery and it did not have plug-in capability. The Porsche 918 was more like this, with plug-in hybrid with a similar kind of range to it.
So is this what we have to look forward to?
It is pretty
gorgeous. Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
Is this what we have to look forward to for supercars now? Is there all is the NSX, there's the Porsche 918, there's this now, they're all hybrids. I guess there's the McLaren, right? That they're doing a McLaren that is all analog.
No, they're not doing an analog McLaren. Gordon Murray's got a new car that is all analog, including a manual transmission, and that one will not be a hybrid. Right. But this one, I mean, from these big brands, from Porsche, Ferrari,
Aston Martin.
I guess Lamborghini. Yeah, Aston Martin is doing a hybrid in the Valkyrie.
And the Valhalla as well will be a hybrid.
Yeah.
Do you really want to name their cars after? Okay, whatever.
Yeah,
that's whatever.
Hey, I mean, how many words can you come up with that start with V?
Exactly.
They want everything from Aston's going to start with a V, except the DBX apparently. Yeah. Every true Aston Martin is going to start with a V. Let's put it that way.
Hey, the DBX will be a true Aston Martin.
We'll see.
But the Valhalla also, Aston, the other thing that they announced this week was that they would always offer manuals.
At least on the Vantage. I don't think cars like the Valkyrie will.
Well, the point is that there will always be.
They will offer something with a manual.
They will always offer something with a manual. I was happy about that.
Yeah.
I look forward to the Aston Martin
for the 3 or 4 Aston Martin buyers that will actually want a manual transmission.
But they'll pay for it. The ones that want it will buy it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the rest of us will just look at pictures online. That's what we do. But yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. Although it seems like, isn't it a little bit weird that to get the max performance out of it, you got to go into qualify mode? Like that's like a track only thing. I would assume it's probably not all that manageable in the street in that mode.
Yeah, well, it doesn't actually say how much of the performance you're going to have in performance mode, which is, it will probably be somewhat less than that. But then again, on the street, do you really need 1,000 horsepower?
Ask the Mopar guys. They seem to be intent on putting them in Challengers and Chargers. Yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting where we've gone from, supercars back in the day were, the Countach and the Testarossa, and now they're these cars that are much, much more sophisticated.
Back when 300 horsepower was something special.
Yeah, well, I mean 300 horsepower from like 2.5 liters or something ridiculous too. So they were still pretty powered.
No, I mean a Countach was about 6.5 liters.
Yeah,
that was a big V12.
Right. I thought they had more than I thought they had like 400 something with the Crotofal Volvi and.
Oh well, later ones did. Yeah. Earlier Countaches weren't even 300.
Yeah, this car still looks like the future.
Yeah.
I would still have a poster on the wall if I were allowed to have car posters on the wall. All right, so I guess we've covered our podcast ground, and we should wrap it up at this point. Did you guys have any emails or comments or anything you wanted to address, or are we good for this week?
I think we're good for this week. What about you, Rebecca?
I'm good.
Okay.
All right. Well, you know where to leave that stuff if you want to communicate with us. You can find us on Twitter or email us directly at wheelbearingscast@gmail.com. And in the meantime, we'll see everybody next time.
Bye.
Bye. The reality is that FCA is not the only automaker, that's got that same kind of message. I mean, there are others who are saying, there is a place for EVs and for electrification, but when you look at the total life cycle, from cradle to grave, the manufacturing, the raw materials, and especially when you factor in what the sources of the energy are, depending on the application and where you are geographically, it makes a big difference what your total life cycle energy use and emissions are going to be.
Right.
So.
So no, I completely agree with what you said, Sam. And the other thing I would say too is it starts and ends with the customer. There's got to be a market, and I think the market for EVs, full battery electrics, is yet to develop in a big way. Okay, I know there's been hundreds of thousands of Teslas sold. I get it, but they're still very expensive. They're at a price point that makes it difficult for two things. It's difficult for the manufacturers to make money on the EVs, and it's difficult for consumers to afford them. That tells me it's a ways off till we really get to truly widespread adoption. So in that time, I think you'll see a lot of, and you see it now, you see it in our portfolio, you see it in others, of competing and complementary technologies, right? We have a strong hybrid in our Pacifica hybrid minivan. So we've got our Pacifica minivan, which has our E-Flight hybrid, and it's unique, and it's the first minivan in the industry that was hybridized. It's been recognized by Ward's 10 Best 2 years in a row, so some great accolades there. We do have one battery electric out in our 500E, and then we've got our e-Torque launched to great acclaim, also Ward's 10 Best last year for the truck. So I think my personal belief is that we will see more of that develop in the marketplace, and some of it too will then have to get, I would expect, reinforced by consumer demand, so that we go there more than once.
Yeah, certainly. I think when you look at the economics of EVs, as you said, there's been hundreds of thousands of Teslas sold, hundreds of thousands of other EVs around the world from various manufacturers. But out of the total market, we're still barely, not even 1% of the global market is battery EVs. And when you look at the mainstream segments, what we call affordable, even in the so-called most affordable EVs, for most consumers, the economics just don't make sense. It doesn't work yet. I mean, it's trending in the right direction, but today in 2019, middle of 2019, if you look, one of the prime examples, the Kia Niro. The base Kia Niro is $23,000. It's a 50 mile per gallon hybrid. And the Kia Niro EV, 240 mile range, $39,000. Even after incentives, you're still looking at $32,000.
Yeah.
The payback period at current U.S. gas prices is about 34 years for an average consumer.
Right.
So that, the numbers for the average consumer don't work yet.
Yes.
Where do you see the market for electrification? I think. First of all, what percent? If you can, what's been the take rate and the acceptance of the plug-in hybrid on the Pacifica?
Plug-in hybrid on the Pacifica, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, but it's around 10% of the total minivan sales. So, it's. It would be nice to see that higher, but that's what the market is feeding back to us. So we'll see how that trends and moves over time. Again, I think that's a great product. I personally drove a hybrid minivan for about 8 or 9 months at the launch, and the great thing was, I live like barely 10 miles from Auburn Hills, so at least in most of the year when the weather's tempered out, I could get to and from work without ever having to really fire the engine, other than acceleration, something like that. But by the same token, I could use it like a completely normal vehicle, go drive up north to go skiing, whatever. So that part is very attractive. Now, I think what you just said on the payback period, if I was really going to go buy the vehicle, you'd still have to go through and do that about, hey, does this make sense? I think there's got to be something else that's motivating the consumer too about why they would buy that. And I think that's largely true if you look at kind of the demographics of the people who buy it. They're interested in trying to do the right thing for sustainable mobility, other things, right?
Certainly, for FCA. You've done a lot of interesting things, on the electrification side, the plug-in hybrid, the 500e, e-torque, the mild hybrids. You were the first to introduce mild hybrids into the U.S. market, at least 48-volt mild hybrids.
Right.
On the flip side, you look at cars like what's right behind us here, these Hellcats, and, that's kind of the complete opposite, And what would you say to people that would criticize FCA, for your approach, with offering vehicles like this at the same time, as you're kind of downplaying the electrification?
Well, I hope we're not seen as downplaying electrification. To your point, we've got the offerings in market, and we're trying to promote them for things like e-torque, like the Pacifica Hybrid. As far as these vehicles, personally, I think they're great vehicles. And to me, they first represent something that meets with a very strong consumer demand. There are people that, absolutely crave and celebrate these cars in a way that few others do. So there's that. And I think, we've talked a bit about the affordability around EVs. There's the consumer end to it. There's also the manufacturer end. And to be honest, some of being able to, we're a total company, right? Being able to be in a very strong pricing position on those products helps us with how we can then offer other products.
What do you see on a global basis in terms of demand for EVs and hybrids and such?
So great question. I think first it's hard to really look at it globally. We have to look market by market. You have to look at North America, you have to look at Europe,
regionally.
You have to look at China. And part of the reason I say that is because the whole effect of government incentives are so strong and so powerful. And I would say, even though China has done a tremendous amount to promote the new energy vehicles and other things, they're off to a very good start. My personal belief is, given how tough the 95 grams per kilometer next year in Europe, and then that hasn't been finalized yet, but talk about maybe another 15% below that in a few years. So I think between having those kind of requirements for CO2 emissions, as well as having, say, an energy infrastructure that largely supports it in terms of the fuel prices are higher through taxation, others that you've got, as well as anywhere in the world, a reinforcing system to try to drive people to electrification. So Jeff's personal expectation, I think you'll see a lot of electrification demand, and really that will flourish in Europe.
Okay. What do you think the biggest misconception is about when we think about Fiat Chrysler, when we think about FCA and how people describe FCA? in the media or that you see people describing it?
Oh, well, so the phrase we love to hate is this thing about we're a laggard, right? That's the one that I just don't think
referring
to say technical competence or something like that, or ability to field electrified products. I've already ticked off what we've done already for electrified products. So I think we've demonstrated that we can not only bring a compelling electrified vehicle to market, but we can do it well, right? We wouldn't get the awards 10 best if these were vehicles that were somehow substandard or subpar, right? The fact that we're winning would suggest we're doing it rather well. That's for others to judge, including the market. But so to me, I think we've demonstrated the basic capability in the house to do this, and now it's a question of getting the market to embrace it and seeing where it heads. So
what would you say it would take? Would FCA support things like higher fuel prices in order to, assuming a government were interested in going down that direction, which they probably aren't in the near future, would you support that? Or, for example, things like in the comments on the CAFE proposals from the current administration, GM, one of the things they mentioned in there was providing extra credits for vehicles, especially electrified vehicles, that are deployed in mobility services, on the premise that those vehicles might be replacing multiple individually owned vehicles and thus have more impact. Are ideas like that, are those things that perhaps you think would be a good idea?
So me personally, I think the right answer is really let the market and let consumers decide. I think we can put a lot of unusual dynamics in the markets if we have too much other intervention with it. I think the fact that there's a credit today towards the purchase of the hybrid vehicles, I think that's probably a good thing as we try to have a bridge. But I think to me the interventions with the market need to be very carefully thought out and hopefully applied and as sparingly as possible. The concern to me is if we really have an invasive policy that drives the manufacturers or the consumers to do one thing or another, and then all of a sudden that goes away, it's a real shock to the system, right? And how do you deal with it? So I wouldn't want to see anything come in that's going to make us overly dependent on something purely because it's a government program or an incentive scheme. I don't think it'll be helpful. My 2 cents. I don't know if we've got an official position, but that's Jeff's opinion.
So, go ahead.
Okay, please.
So, okay, going back to ICEs, what are some of the other things that FCA has already done a lot of things over the last 10 years. You were first to introduce start-stop systems on trucks, on the Ram. You did the 48-volt mild hybrids. What other technologies do you foresee coming to market, that would help boost the efficiency of those kinds of powertrains?
I think there's a number of other technologies out there, right? If you look at and some of it can be done even with very careful integration and work of the technologies that are already there in terms of really watching how much fuel we use over the course of a typical driving cycle, things like that. I think too there's opportunities for lower viscosity fluids, for better energy recovery. So one of the things that we've put into our light duty truck is we have a heater for the rear axle. Right, that's something that most others have not done. But as we look at the energy consumption, right, during a startup and a warm-up, it's like, hey, this is one of the areas that we could benefit from. If you had the rear differential oil warmer sooner, we could do better. So I think you'll see that type of thing occur more and more to try to really get the energy budget, energy recovery optimized to the best we can. And there will be a lot of things that are specific technologies that aim to do that.
So a lot of little incremental things,
yes.
To tackle the, attention to detail in the overall design.
Exactly right. Attention to detail and careful optimization.
Right. I mean, you're really trying to pull out every tenth of gram or tenth
Right.
of a mile
Right.
per mile.
Right.
It's such an interesting company because there's such diversity of your brands.
Mm-hmm.
So you go from the Fiat, the 500e, and then all the way through to some of the Maserati products, the Alphas.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see the most opportunity, or what brand do you see the most opportunity to kind of penetrate that really the requirement, the mandate that we have for electric vehicles, particularly in the ZEV mandate in California?
So I would say this. I don't think it's any one brand or any two brands for us. I think the key for us, and we've talked about this some, but you'll hear more as well. So a vehicle that we've spoken about a little, again, you'll see more, but when we put a hybrid system in our Jeep Wrangler as an example, and Jeep might be a brand that wouldn't be the first to come to your mind when you ask that question.
Right.
But I would say what's going to be key for us is that when we bring electrification to the product, that it enhances and betters what that product delivers to the customer. That to us is the way to have electrification really develop a following and garner a market, is that it's not something that it's an asterisk to what the brand normally delivers. It doubles down on what the brand delivers.
Right. No,
that's what we're trying to do. So that's why I say it's not a one or a two brand answer. It's all the brands, but they've got to figure out, right? So go out a bit on a limb here, but if we were going to electrify a Dodge product or maybe even an Alfa, right, that's got to speak more to performance. So
right, so it's still keep a stewardship of the brand.
Exactly right.
Yes.
Yeah.
But through electrification. Interesting.
When the Pacifica Hybrid was introduced a couple of years ago, I talked to one of your colleagues, and one of the things that was mentioned was that the hybrid drive unit for the Pacifica was designed to fit within the same package envelope as the existing 9-speed that you use on your transverse engine products. Do you see? I guess is there any market? Is there enough of a market to justify spreading that, in either plug-in or standard hybrid variants into some other model lines in order to gain some extra scale? Do the economics work out for you to do that?
Okay, so you won't see many of these here because we sell it in China, but we just are really in the middle of launching right now the Grand Commander in China with the plug-in hybrid. It uses that same drive unit that's in the Pacifica Hybrid. So yes, we're working on what else? There's other things that I can't really talk about too much, but we're doing that now.
Okay.
I think that's great. I mean, I think that it's exciting to talk about these kinds of brands. We said they each have such a specific identity to it, and the idea of enhancing that, I think, is a great way to introduce this technology or encourage adoption of this technology, even as you're a good steward.
Yes.
So, what that Dodge, what the Scat Pack does, or what the Wrangler can do off-road, that, I think it's one of the challenges that other brands have had is trying to slap it on top of what they do already and not making products that are true to their brand.
Right.
So, for somebody that looks at consumer behavior a lot like I do, I think that's one of the keys to success, is staying true to the brand.
Yeah. We think so too. Obviously, we invest a lot in being, as you said, careful stewards of our brands, and are trying to do the same thing as we approach electrification.
Right. Awesome, Jeff. Thank you so much for your time.
All right.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Sam.
We really appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Thank you.
Thank you.